If you've ever planted something in your backyard and watched it get eaten alive by disease, twist into some weird deformed shape, or just quietly die for no reason, you could figure out. I need you to stop blaming yourself. It's probably not you. It's your soil. Here's the thing nobody tells beginner gardeners. The ground in your yard is not a blank canvas. It's already got a history. Fungal spores that have been sitting there for years. Nematodes. Compacted clay that suffocates roots. A pH that's stuck exactly where it's been for decades no matter what you dump on it. You are not gardening in a lab. You're gardening in whatever soil biology and chemistry happened to accumulate on your property before you ever showed up. And that's exactly why, for a very specific list of crops, throwing that soil out entirely and growing in a pot instead isn't a compromise. It's an upgrade. In this video, I'm breaking down 10 crops that research and real growing trials show actually perform better, cleaner, healthier, sometimes even more productively in a container than they do in the ground. We'll get into the actual science of why containers behave differently from soil. We'll bust a couple of drainage myths you probably believed your whole life. And by the end, you'll know exactly which crops to stop fighting your yard for and start growing in a pot instead. Let's get into it. Why this matters right now before we get to the crops. You need to understand something. This isn't a niche hobby anymore. It's a full-blown shift in how Americans grow food. Container gardening exploded during the pandemic, when roughly 18.3 million new gardeners entered the hobby almost overnight. A lot of industries see that kind of spike fade once life goes back to normal. This one didn't. According to the 2026 National Gardening Survey, participation actually leveled off for around 79.2% of U.S. households in 2025, but total spending hit an all-time record of $79 billion. The casual gardeners left. The committed ones just spent more. Average household spend hit $740 a year, up over 18% from the year before. And here's the part that really matters for this video. The people driving that spending aren't homeowners with sprawling backyards. They're renters. The 2026 Axiom Gardening Outlook study found what researchers are calling the renter inversion. Urban renters who garden now outbuy suburban homeowners on vegetable seed, 43.5% to 36.6%, and on herb seed by an even wider margin. People without yards are outspending people with yards. That only works one way: containers. So this isn't a workaround for people who don't have real gardens. For millions of growers, the pot is the garden, which means it's worth understanding exactly why it works. And for some crops, why it works better. The science. Nobody explains. And the myth you've been told your whole life. Here's where it gets interesting, because most people think a container is just a smaller, worse version of the ground. Physically, that's not true. A container is a completely different environment. In your yard, especially if you got any clay content, soil compacts, foot traffic, heavy rain, time. It all presses the particles together until there's no room left for air. And roots need air. When oxygen can't reach the root surface, you get hypoxia, and hypoxic roots can't absorb nutrients properly no matter how much fertilizer you throw at them. A container sidesteps that completely because you're not using dirt, you're using engineered soilless media, peat moss, coconut coir, perlite, vermiculite. These substrates hold a stable ratio of air to water, even when they're fully saturated. That's not a minor detail, that's the whole game. But here's where I need to correct something you've probably been told your entire life. You know the advice to put a layer of gravel or broken pottery at the bottom of a pot for drainage? It's wrong. Completely backwards, actually. Water doesn't move freely between two different textures of material. It gets trapped at that boundary line, creating what's called a perched water table. Instead of draining, that gravel layer actually raises the saturated zone closer to your plant's roots. You're not improving drainage. You're engineering root rot. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Just use a uniform substrate top to bottom in a pot with real open drainage holes. That's it. There's also a heat advantage most people never think about. Container walls are exposed to the air, so dark pots absorb sunlight and can warm the root zone up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit faster than the ground around them in early spring. That extra warmth kicks off earlier root growth. faster germination and skips a lot of the transplant shock that happens when you put a seedling into cold, wet spring soil. And maybe the biggest advantage of all, pathogen exclusion. Soil-borne diseases. Water molds like Phytophthora and Pythium, wilt fungi like Verticillium, root knot nematodes. These things can live in garden soil for years. Once they're established, some crops become nearly impossible to grow in that ground ever again. Start with clean, pasteurized potting mix in a container though, and you've built a sterile fortress. No history, no contamination, a clean slate every single time. Okay, now that you understand why containers behave differently, let's talk about exactly which crops take the biggest advantage of that difference. Some of these might really surprise you. The 10 crops.
1. Blueberries. The pH problem you can't fix in the ground. Blueberries need soil in a very narrow acidic range, pH 4.0 to 5.5. Most American yards sit at neutral to alkaline. You can dump elemental sulfur on the ground all season, but the surrounding native soil just buffers it right back to where it started. That constant tug-of-war leads iron chlorosis and eventually a dead bush in a container. You skip that fight entirely. You're not amending native soil. You're replacing it with a 50-50 blend of peat moss and pine bark that stays acidic because there's no surrounding soil to buffer it back. The trade-off? Container roots have zero insulation from the earth, so in cold winters they need to come into an unheated garage or get buried in ground for dormancy. And hard tap water will slowly creep the pH back up over time, so a lot of growers switch to rainwater. You're looking at a 15 to 20 gallon pot, full sun, and about 3 years to first real harvest, 3 to 5 pounds per bush. Varieties like Sunshine Blue, Top Hat, and Patriot are bred specifically to handle this container life well. 2. Edible figs. Stress makes them fruit faster. This one's counterintuitive. In the ground, a fig tree's root system goes hunting for water and nutrients, and all that energy gets redirected into leaves and wood instead of fruit. You end up with a massive tree that barely produces. Restrict those roots in a container, though, and the plant reads that mild stress is a signal to shift into reproduction mode, fruiting earlier and more reliably. A potted fig can set fruit in its first or second year, versus years of waiting for an in-ground tree to mature into fruiting size. The catch is drought sensitivity. Let a potted fig dry out and it'll drop fruit prematurely, and you'll need to root prune and refresh the substrate every 3 to 4 years. Skip the nitrogen-heavy fertilizers too, since those trigger leaf growth over fruit. A high potassium feed, like a tomato formula, bi-weekly through the season, gets you 5 to 15 pounds a year from varieties like Brown Turkey or Celeste. 3. Potatoes. Clean tubers without the digging. In-ground potatoes are sitting ducks for potato scab, verticillium wilt, and root rot, and once those pathogens are in your soil, they don't leave. Ever. A container growing medium is sterile, so you get blemish-free tubers without that disease pressure, and harvest becomes almost comically easy. Instead of digging through soil and slicing tubers with your shovel by accident, you just tip the fabric grow bag over. Use a 10 to 15 gallon breathable fabric bag. Keep the moisture consistent. Inconsistent watering causes hollow, knobby tubers, and you'll get 5 to 9 pounds per bag in 70 to 120 days. Yes, that's less than a full garden row would give you, but you're trading raw volume for guaranteed clean, disease-free potatoes. For eggplant, turning heat into an advantage. Eggplant needs serious warmth to get going, and in-ground soil warms up slowly, which stunts early growth and can cause blossom drop. Remember that 10 degrees Fahrenheit thermal boost containers get from solar-absorbing dark plastic? Eggplant thrives on exactly that. Faster warming means earlier flowering and better yields, plus complete isolation from verticillium wilt, which devastates in-ground nightshades. The trade-off is that same heat can dry the pot out fast in midsummer, so daily watering becomes non-negotiable, and eggplants hate cold wind, needing protection below 55 degrees Fahrenheit. A 5-gallon pot, full sun and consistent moisture gets you 4 to 6 large fruits per plant in 55 to 85 days. Fairy Tale and Patio Baby are built for this. 5. Peppers, escaping the rot window. Peppers have delicate roots that are extremely vulnerable to Phytophthora and Pythium. And here's the scary part. Soggy soil for as little as 5 to 6 hours can trigger infection and kill the plant. Heavy clay yards hold water exactly that long after a rainstorm. A fast-draining container mix. 50% peat or coir, 50% perlite. Simply removes that risk from the equation. Use a 3 to 5 gallon pot. Water only when the top inch is dry, and never let water pool in a saucer. You'll get 20 or 40 peppers per plant in 60 to 90 days from varieties like Gypsy or Jalapeno. 6. Strawberries, getting the fruit off the ground. 90% of strawberry plants' roots sit in the top 6 inches of soil, which makes them extremely vulnerable to weeds, waterlogging, and fungal disease. Worse, in the ground, the fruit itself touches damp soil, inviting gray mold and slugs. Elevate them in a container or hanging basket, and you solve both problems at once. Roots avoid soil pathogens, and fruit never touches the ground. The downside: containers rarely have enough thermal mass to overwinter strawberries as perennials, so most growers treat them as annuals or wrap them heavily for winter. A 12-inch, 8-inch deep pot with sandy loam and compost gets you a steady ½ pound to a pound of fruit per plant all summer from varieties like Albion or Seascape. 7. Carrots, straight roots every time. Carrots need loose, stone-free soil to grow straight. The second a taproot hits a rock, clay chunk, or a root in your yard, it forks, splits, or twists into something you'd be embarrassed to serve. A sifted, engineered potting mix removes every single obstacle. The catch: carrots have to be direct seeded, never transplanted, and the surface needs to stay damp for the full 14-day germination window, or you'll get spotty results. A container at least 12 to 18 inches deep, filled with equal parts peat, perlite, and compost, can yield 50 to 60 straight carrots in 60 to 80 days, genuinely outperforming a lot of backyard clay soil harvests. 8. Sunchokes, containing the uncontainable. Sunchokes are aggressive. Leave behind a root fragment smaller than 1/8 of an inch during harvest, and it'll sprout right back and spread through your entire garden bed. In ground, they're basically a managed invasive species. A container is a hard physical wall against that spread, and it turns harvest from sift through a huge area of soil into dump the pot out. The trade-off is that these plants grow 8 to 10 feet tall and are prone to tipping in wind, so you need a heavy pot and staking. Go with a dwarf variety like Dwarf Sunray, which Ohio State University trials found stays around 4 feet and clusters its tubers close to stem. Ideal for pots. Expect 2 to 5 pounds of tubers per plant, in a container that's actually safer for your yard than the ground would be. 9. Ginger. Buying yourself an extra season. Ginger needs 8 to 10 months of warm, humid growing time, and it hates cold, wet soil. In most of the U.S., the ground simply doesn't warm early enough or stay warm long enough for ginger to mature outdoors. A container solves this by being mobile. Start rhizomes indoors on a heat mat in late winter. Move them outside for summer. Bring them back in before nights drop below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. You're not fighting your climate. You're relocating the plant around it. This is such an effective workaround that in-ground ginger production is flatly impossible in northern zones, and even southern in-ground attempts often fail from soil pathogens. A 10 to 15 gallon wide, shallow bag with rich, heavily fed soil yields close to 2 pounds of fresh ginger in 8 to 10 months. Something a northern backyard literally cannot produce at all. 10. Dwarf tomatoes, clean roots, early harvest. In-ground tomatoes face root knot nematodes, Fusarium, verticillium, and soil splash blight, a long list of soil-borne problems that have plagued backyard tomato growers forever. Dwarf varieties bred to stay compact, grown in sterile container media. Sidestep essentially all of it, and because the pot warms up faster in spring, they mature earlier without needing pruning or a trellis system. The one thing you can't get sloppy about is watering consistency. Let the soil dry out completely and then flood it, and you'll trigger blossom end rot and split fruit. A 5-gallon pot with consistent moisture gets you 3 to 5 pounds of cherry tomatoes in 55 to 65 days from varieties like Tiny Tim or Red Robin. Now that you've got the 10 crops, there's one more thing you need to hear, because it applies no matter what you're growing in a pot. We already covered the gravel drainage myth. Skip it entirely, but there are a few more misconceptions worth clearing up. First, bigger isn't always better. Planting a small seedling directly into a huge pot feels generous, but the tiny root system can't pull water from all that surrounding soil, so the edges stay cold, wet, and anaerobic, exactly the environment Pythium and Phytophthora love. Pot up gradually as the roots actually expand to fill the space. Second, those self-watering planters sold at garden centers with a sealed reservoir and no overflow during heavy rain or overwatering. They flood the entire substrate with nowhere for excess water to go, drowning the roots. A real self-watering system needs a visible overflow hole, not just a sealed base. And third, don't reuse old potting soil season after season without treating it. Pathogens, insect eggs, and weed seeds build up in there, and the organic material breaks down and compacts over time. Replace it or pasteurize it between seasons, or you're bringing back exactly the soil-borne problem containers were supposed to eliminate in the first place. I want to be straight with you. Containers aren't a free upgrade with zero downsides. There are 4 real trade-offs, and each one has a simple fix. Root zones overheat faster. Solve with breathable fabric pots or light-color containers that reflect heat instead of absorbing it. Moisture disappears faster. Solve with a couple inches of mulch and, ideally, drip irrigation on a timer. Nutrients leach out faster because you're watering more often. Solve with a slow-release fertilizer at planting plus light liquid feeding every couple weeks. And tall crops like sunchokes and eggplants can tip over in wind. Solve with heavy base pots and proper staking. None of these are deal breakers. They're just a maintenance cost of getting a sterile, customizable, disease-free root environment. For the 10 crops we just covered, that trade is overwhelmingly worth it, which is exactly why university trials at Illinois, Ohio State, Rutgers, and the University of Florida have all documented the same pattern. Cleaner roots, fewer losses, and in several cases, results that simply aren't achievable in the ground at all. So here's the real takeaway. Your yard isn't a failure, and you're not a bad gardener. Some crops are just fundamentally fighting an uphill battle against soil chemistry, soil-borne disease, and your local climate the moment you put them in the ground. Move blueberries, figs, potatoes, peppers, carrots, sunchokes, ginger, and dwarf tomatoes into a container instead, and you're not settling for less. For these crops, you're actually choosing the better system. Now, obviously, none of this works without the right growing medium underneath it. And that raises the next question you're probably already thinking about. What should you actually be mixing into those pots? That's exactly what I'm breaking down in the next video. The real substrate recipes, ratios, and mistakes to avoid so your containers perform the way they're supposed to. If you're serious about getting real yields out of pots this season, that one's not optional. Go watch it next.